Pick up bills in the order they're posted outside the hearing room. Our hearing today is part of your public part of the legislative process. This is your opportunity to express your position on proposed legislation before us today. We do ask that you limit or eliminate handouts. If you are unable to attend a public hearing and would like your position stated for the record, you may submit your position and any comments using the legislature's website by 12 p.m. the day prior to the hearing. Letters emailed to a senator or staff member will not be part of the permanent record. If you are unable to attend and testify at a public hearing due to disability, you may use the Nebraska Legislature's website to submit written testimony in lieu of in-person testimony. To better facilitate today's proceedings, I ask that you follow these procedures. Please turn off your cell phones and other electronic devices. The order of testimony is introduced to proponents, opponents, neutrals, and closing remarks. If you will be testifying, please complete the green form and hand it to the committee clerk when you come up to testify. If you have written materials that you would like to distribute to the committee, please hand them to the page to distribute. We need 11 copies for all committee members and staff. If you need additional copies, please ask a page to make copies for you now. When you begin to testify, please state and spell both your first and last name for the record. Please be concise. We will use the light system. You'll have 4 minutes on green and 1 minute on yellow, and then you need to wrap up. If your remarks were reflected in previous testimony or you would like your position to be known but do not wish to testify, please sign the white form at the back of the room and it will be included in the official record. Please speak directly into the microphone so our transcribers are able to hear your testimony clearly. I will introduce committee staff. To my immediate left is research analyst Charles Hamilton. To my far left at the end of the table is Committee Clerk Thomas Weekly. And now I'd like the senators to introduce themselves, starting at my far right.
Kathleen Kauth, LD 31 Millard.
Senator David Merman, District 38, Glenville.
Brad Von Gillern, District 4, West Omaha and Elkhorn.
Tom Breezy, District 41. Welcome.
Joni Albright, District 17.
George Duggan, District 26, Northeast Lincoln.
And the pages, if they could stand up, please. So we have Caitlin, who's at UNL, junior in political science. And we have someone new today. Say your first name. Langton, who's at UNL as well, a senior in political science and history. Thank you. Please remember that senators may come and go during our hearing as they have bills to introduce in other committees. Please refrain from applause or other indications of support or opposition. For our audience, the microphones in the room are not for amplification, but for recording purposes only. Lastly, we use electronic devices to distribute information. Therefore, you may see committee members referencing information on their electronic devices. Be assured that your presence here today and your testimony are important to us and a critical part of our state government. And I am sorry we are late, Senator Whiting. We had exec committee that ran over.
It's okay. I'm not in judiciary, so it's a positive.
You want to talk really slow. I have a lot of questions. Okay, so we open the hearing on LB 235.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Justin Wayne, JUSTINWAYNE. And I first just want to take a brief second. I represent District 13, which is North Omaha and Northeast Douglas County. I first want to, what I'm handing out is going to be actually used in both this bill and the next bill, but I just want to give a brief history because I am thankful for this committee, particularly Senator Linehan, Breezy, and Senator Albright, who's been on this committee and who helped, I think, great strides in North Omaha as far as economic development that has came from this committee. First bill, one of the first bills was LB 544 2 years ago, was a tax credit for Urban Redevelopment Act. And that's where we started the conversation. And we passed that bill. It's an $8 million cap. But I came to this committee and handed out big pieces of paper, the maps, showing 24th Street, 30th Street, and the individual lots and the lack of economic development because of ImagiNE and those kind of acts apply to such big organizations that left out small businesses. And the Urban Redevelopment Act allows for up to a $50,000 tax credit for small businesses who are trying to develop those individual lots. That has been taken advantage of, and we are seeing some economic development. I also want to thank this committee on 1107, although I wasn't in favor of it. We did work out a partial agreement around incentives that are in economic redevelopment areas. Again, it's the same coin that we use, the term that we use, and we also put some extra incentives around extremely blighted. That also targets the same area that you'll see in these maps. And what this first bill does today is it tweaks the ImagiNE Act for those who are located within a qualified economic redevelopment area. And there are some across the state. South Sioux City has one, Hastings has one, but the majority of the biggest ones are in Omaha, particularly around the area that we're focusing in on. And the one thing I learned quickly, we put in a child care tax credit for an incentive, but that child care facility had to be located on their headquarters, on their physical location. What we quickly found out through conversations, whether it be Logiers, Airlight Plastic, or any other organizations around the airport park or the airport area. And so I know this is not allowed props, but I'm just going to tell you. So above Abbott Drive and anywhere actually above, well, this is called Storage Parkway, right above the blue line, you'll notice these property lines, and there are manufacturers there who want to do upgrades and also want to do a child care facility, but you can't get that credit on the ImagiNE unless it's truly on their facility. And we have a lot of third shifts, second shifts, first shifts parents who are getting good paying jobs but have no daycares around this facility. So what I would like to do underneath LB 235 is allow that same tax credit to be used in our hardest hit economic areas for child care facilities that are created around or in these areas that are with 1 mile from that company. So if Airlight Plastic or Logiers, and no, I haven't talked to them to use their name, I'm just using big employers, decided they wanted to upgrade a facility, expand a facility, and they were going to bring however many more jobs to qualified ImagiNE. They could also work with a local or start a local daycare within the same ERA and pay for their individual employees to go there and still receive the same kind of tax credit. For those who don't know, economic redevelopment area is at least 150% average unemployment rate and at least 20% poverty. So it's really one of our hardest hit areas. And so as we look at the LAMP study, and I'm going to walk through this on both, so maybe I'll just say it once here. LAMP study was the key behind 1024 last year. And on the second page, you'll see the kind of area that is marked out. The money we set aside, the $65 million, and this year Senator McKinney's amendment is asking for an additional $35 million, is that highlighted white yellow area. It's one parcel of land, it's 65 acres. And Governor Ricketts at the time didn't want to have to worry about relocating anybody in the northern part. So we keyed in on this area being the area we could help develop. The second phase of that is the bigger map you see here, which is Airport Park 2 of the other area that we are seeking to develop. And that'll be the next bill we're going to talk about, but I just want to give you context. So if you look around this area again on either map, you see that there's a lot of landlocked that companies already own. And the only way we're going to grow these companies, if you look at every major headquarters now, there is a daycare either on site or near. Well, we need these companies to be able to compete, at least in North Omaha, by providing that same kind of daycare service and getting the same tax credit that they would get out in Sarpy County if they were to build it on their physical headquarter location. So we limit it to 1 mile. I'm willing to limit it to a half a mile. But the key is for these companies to not either go out and work with current daycares or build their own, but they just can't do it on the land that they have today because they're already tapped out. So we're trying to figure out how to create that. The second benefit to this is if you talk to these individual businesses, one of the biggest problems we have when it comes to employment wages is you start off maybe at one of these companies making $15 an hour. You get your first promotion, you actually lose your child care because you make too much. So we literally have, if you were to talk to these companies who are in this light manufacturing space, we are having people turn down raises and turn down jobs because the amount that they make on the back end from their raise doesn't cover their child care. Well, this would offer that employee an additional benefit by their owner, their employer, being able to help provide some of that child care. And again, outside of these economic redevelopment areas, there's usually land in this development where they're already building the child care facility on their land. But when it comes to East Omaha, downtown South Sioux City, and downtown Hastings, there really isn't the same opportunity to acquire land and build those facilities for their employees. So that's the intent of LB 235, is to allow these companies to have the same breaks that they would if they built a new headquarters in Western Omaha or Sarpy County. And with that, I will answer any questions.
Are there questions, Senator Cal?
Thank you,
Senator
Chair.
Cal?
Thank you, Chairman. Are there childcare centers around in that area now, or are there plans for them to be?
No, there's only one at the school. I can give you the location. It's the one that has 3-2 on the left side of the box. You have like
Which
927
map?
on this map on the little red house right there. That's actually a community center, and next to it is a school. And that is the only child care facility that is by that area, and it's an after-school program. And that's part of the reason why Airlight Plastic and Logiers and I can't think of the big company down there right now that does equipment, modern equipment, have been trying to figure out how to build a daycare. And that's kind of what made this pop up, is they were applying for ImagiNE, but they couldn't qualify underneath there because they couldn't put it on their site.
Is there space in that, because it's just a 1 mile radius, is there space to put one? Okay,
There's plenty of
empty or open?
empty or smaller lots that could be developed, but they're small, they're too small for a new manufacturer, a new extension of their warehouse. It's just not big enough for that, but it'd be good for a daycare. But they aren't contiguous to their land. So let's say Airlight Plastic wants to buy the land, I don't know, the big triangle between Lindbergh and Abbott Drive, if they want to put a daycare there, because it's not contiguous on their headquarters, they wouldn't qualify under ImagiNE. That's the problem.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Senator Cal. Are there other questions from the committee? Senator Van Gillen?
So I want to make sure, I think I heard you correctly. Are some of those companies talking about not joint venturing would be a business term, but just trying to jointly develop a daycare to serve more than one organization?
I cannot confirm or deny that.
Okay.
There's just been conversations.
If
this
they were,
this-
that would still comply with the way that you have drafted the bill.
Correct.
Okay, all right. That's probably a more appropriate question. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van Gillen. Senator Wing, could you explain for us that aren't as familiar? I mean, I know where Airlight Plastics is, but I'm having a hard time with the map. So which one is Airlight Plastics?
Airlight Plastic is the one directly north. Yeah, the one directly north, and then to the west of that is another facility, and then Logiers is to the left of that. Am I right? No.
So these two?
No. Logiers is to the directly north. Yeah,
The top is north, right?
yeah. Top is north. 'Cause they're
And what
both-
school is this little red?
That is Sherman Elementary School, that has the highest homelessness in the state and have some of the best scores.
Is it because it's close to the homeless shelter?
Correct. They brought bus from both homeless shelters downtown.
Other questions from the committee? Is there a fiscal monitoring bill?
It's like, well, kind of. Well, not really. No basis to disagree. There was no impact supposedly under ImagiNE, and part of the reason is I think it's because you currently can't qualify. So how can you quantify who would be able to qualify if they want to do a daycare? Because everybody knows right now you don't qualify, so they don't ask for it.
But you're saying you build a daycare in your facility that qualifies for ImagiNE?
Correct. We added that for the third district. They wanted to do daycare, or they had a hard time establishing daycares, and so we put it part of the incentive that if they build it and it's on their headquarter property, that they get a tax credit for that and the cost of sending the kids to the daycare.
And yours is if it's within a mile, same thing.
Within a mile of an economic redevelopment area, and there's only like 14 in the state, and they're small.
Senator Breeze.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Wayne, for this. Current language limits it to daycares at the qualified location. Is there a reason for doing that, or is that an oversight? What's the purpose of that language?
Well, the purpose was, if I recall, there was a conversations in Seward and not Ogallala, somewhere west of there, where there were manufacturers who were trying to help the community by building a daycare, and they wanted to be able to qualify. And the only way we could limit it was to put it on their facility, so they weren't building a daycare all the way across town, or that may or may not benefit the corporation. So we limited it to the qualified location, which was their headquarters, their property, which is fine if you have it, but East Omaha, they don't have extra property to do it. So we'd have to literally buy it somewhere else, most likely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Greasy. Senator Merman.
I assume part of the intent of having a daycare in the facility is so that the parents can have more access to their children and monitor their children if necessary too.
Correct.
And I do like the fact that it's within 1 mile, so parents would still have pretty good access to their children.
And we're willing to go to a half a mile if it's a big concern. I didn't want to get into the 600-yard feet debate because it gets tied up with other issues. So we just picked 1 mile, but we could do anything. We just trying to figure out how to help in this area. And again, this would apply to 24th Street, 30th Street. It wouldn't apply really in my district. I don't have a ERA, except for in this little area down by the airport.
Is that the hook in your district?
Yeah, the hook.
I'm sorry, Senator Merman, did you have more?
Yeah, no, that's it.
Are there other questions? So going back to the $15 an hour, and then they get a raise, and then they lose their subsidy from the state or federal government or whoever, because what is that income limit?
I can get you that. I can get you that. Part of it's changed. I think there's a bill on it right now, so there's I got to figure out what it is right now.
Well,
We
and we've
changed
got
it.
another bill that we just execed on this morning that would might have some interlocking effect. I'm not sure.
But for me, it's one way to help with the cliff effect in some capacity, but it's also one of the biggest reasons why I think employers are having a hard time on that second and third shift is there's no daycares near or around any of these facilities.
Would these daycares be open for second and third shifts?
Yeah, I mean, you can
That
add
would
that.
be-
You could add that to the bill. I don't care. Like, yeah, we can make it a requirement. Right?
Well, I'm just, because that is a problem for families.
Correct.
You got, so what usually happens, one works day, and if they're lucky enough to have 2 parents, you can change shifts, but
Correct, and most of the daycares that are second and third shifts right now in East Omaha are out of people's homes, and so having maybe a quality, I ain't saying they're not high quality, I think they are, but having a different option might be good for them too. And as we continue to grow this area, there's just going to be a need for it. So,
okay, any other questions? Okay. Did you round up a bunch of testifiers?
most of my successful bills don't have any testifiers. Usually they say something to get me in trouble.
Do we have any proponents? Do we have any opponents? Anyone wanting to testify in a neutral position? Would you like to close?
No way, well,
Okay, we wait. Welcome, Senator.
let's just say I think.
Wayne,
I
we'll
think
open
I think I
on
had a testifier, but that might have changed over the course of the debate.
350.
I'll tell you about it one day. Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Justin Wayne, JUSTINWAYNE, and I represent Legislative District 13, which is North Omaha and Northeast Douglas County. So again, I want to thank everybody for what they've done previously, especially with 1024. And so as we started going through and focusing in on the Airport Park District and the Innovation Hub, we quickly noticed that we need to make sure that it isn't just foundations. We need a private sector buy-in as we continue to develop. So I began to look at different tax credits to help the private sector engage in the development of economic development. And LB 350 will create a pioneer economic development tax credit. This credit will be used For contributions to qualifying organizations, a list of eligible organizations and donations that qualify will be created and maintained by the Department of Economic Development. But what this does is it creates a tax credit to help local growing businesses get resources they need. The bill incentivizes donations by creating an income tax credit up to 50% of the amount donated. This tax credit can be carried forward up to 5 years until the donor decides to use it. The Department of Economic Development determines the organizations and companies eligible for the program by verifying that it fits underneath one of these categories. The organization must be identified as an iHub underneath the Nebraska Innovation Act, Senator McKinney's LB 450 of last year we passed, or that the organization be designated as a community development institution. This is a selected list, and in order to be designated as such, you must receive certification by the U.S. Department of Treasury and must be eligible to receive funding from a community development institution fund, the operator, CDFI. These are not just donations that can be given for anything. They have to be used for specific purposes. A project to make a site ready for industrial development is one, and it must be owned by the qualifying organization. A project for construction for intermodal facility at a site owned by a qualifying organization. A construction of a sports facility or stadium that is owned by a qualifying organization. A project to provide funding for the creation and operation of accelerator programs for technology. Accelerator programs cannot last more than 2 years and have to have defined curriculum and mentorship components. And a project that is funded and supported by underrepresented communities that are located within a specific area and have fewer than 10 employees. And the revenue must be less than $500,000. Again, we are focusing on small businesses for economic development purposes. The bill caps this at $50 million per year. So I try to limit it a little bit. And I got this basis from the Alabama Grow Alabama incentive. Again, the purpose of this, when you look at this development, and I laid out what the Lampson study said it would take to do the whole thing, which back then was around 131 million to get everything site ready and shovel ready. That's now grown to a little bit over 200 million for the northern part, this big blue part. And we believe that we need to create and get more corporate buy-in to help build the rest of this out and raise capital to do so. And we look at the Pioneer tax credit as the ability to do so. If you'll recall, last year, I brought a bill to toy with the Community Financing Act, which applies to rural Nebraska. And what it does is allow for rural projects to start and donors can donate to it and get a tax credit. So I just took that idea and I applied it to the Pioneer tax credit, broadened it a little bit, but at the same time, this is for the corporate community who wants to put in, or individual community who wants to put in. Whereas right now, I believe in North Omaha, we are relying too much on the philanthropic community to do our economic development. So this gives us the ability and the leverage to start having conversations with corporations that they get a tax break to develop in their own communities. So again, this is more about corporate engagement. This is about economic development, and it's about creating an innovation hub zone where we can help innovate and provide a different skill set for our community. I've said this multiple times to this committee. I think we cannot close the wealth gap alone through just education. We have to start businesses and we have to have homeownership. By investing in a business and getting equity in a business, you are building wealth. By investing in a home and getting ownership in a home, you are building wealth. And again, this committee passed a first home buyer tax credits for economic redevelopment areas. So we did that, and this is my attempt to do the same thing on the corporate side by creating more economic incentives for key areas on our poorest areas across the state to make some changes. And with that, I will answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Okay, how come you get a fiscal note? You have a tax limit at 50 million. If every time I've done a bill, it says it'll be 50 million. How come your fiscal note says it's going to be less than $1 million?
I think the fiscal office read the huge impact this is going to have, and they want to make sure we pass this bill. So, yeah, I read that too. Usually when I do an $8 million cap, the fiscal note is $8 million, right? So I don't know.
They don't think it's gonna work.
Maybe they don't. In Alabama, that was part of how, just on an anecdotal note on Alabama, that is how they raised money for Space Command through a very similar one. And it was only limited to, I think theirs is capped at 50 million. But they actually maxed that out on 2 projects for for Space Command, which that community raised a little over $100 million from the private sector to bring them in. And that's kind of why I went with this one, because it seemed to have the most relevant data of working in communities where they need incentives and economic development.
Okay. Senator Duggan.
Thank you, Chair Minahan. You might have said this during your opening, and I apologize if I missed it, but how many iHubs currently exist?
None. DED has yet to put out the application. I think Senator McKinney has been talking about limiting to congressional districts, so we don't have 45 different iHubs. But what we have done to control spending from the state level is we have limited all the dollars for an iHub to be within 2 miles of the airport. So we're really trying to create this innovation. And if you don't know what an innovation hub is, we do invest in an innovation hub that's done correctly. A caveat with that, you get $23 on return. And for every innovator you bring to this district, the multiplier is by 4 of economic development. And usually the innovator's average job is 100,000. That's not me talking. I can get you all the studies on it. If you look at Cambridge, what Boston has done around that area, St. Louis just announced that they are creating over 20,000 square feet of wet lab space. Believe it or not, in the state of Nebraska, we only have 7,500, of which most is downtown at our Lincoln and our innovation hub. And there's no businesses by there, so it hasn't quite taken off like it should have. But just wet lab space alone, there are 149 companies inside the university system who are looking for space just to be able to operate for their startups. So we see this as a huge economic opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duggan. Are there other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there proponents? Are there any opponents? Does anyone want to testify in the neutral position? Senator Wayne waives closing.
Thank you.
Senator Wayne.
Consent calendar, appreciate it.
And we'll open the hearing on LB 185. Good afternoon, Senator Cavanaugh.
Good afternoon, Chair Minahan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Senator John Cavanaugh, John Cavanaughh, and I represent the 9th Legislative District in Midtown Omaha, and I'm here to present LB 185, which would provide for $500 million in tax rebate checks to eligible Nebraskans. I brought LB 185 as an alternative option for the Revenue Committee and the legislature to consider in discussing taxes. Nebraska has an unprecedented surplus right now, and returning the money to taxpayers is appropriate. LB 185 would give a one-time tax rebate to Nebraska taxpayers as an alternative to more permanent tax cuts on top of the tax cuts this body has already passed. My fear is that with term limits, with politics being the way they are, and the incentives are not there to look longer term than the next election. The legislature passed a historic amount of property tax credits in 2020 and then increased those amounts in 2021 and 2022 with a plan to increase again in 2023. The legislature cut corporate income tax in 2021, cut them further in 2022, and the governor is proposing even further cuts in 2023. And I'm not a betting man, but I would wager that there'll be further proposed tax cuts in 2024. I'm not going to take up too much of your time on this bill. This is an idea that came up during the debate on tax cut package last year, and I brought the bill to continue that discussion and to provide the committee with some alternative proposals. I ask for your support for LB 185, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Senator Cavanaugh. Are there questions from the committee? You just divided up equally to every Nebraskan?
Well, every taxpayer, yeah.
Every taxpayer, so every taxpayer get the same amount?
Yeah, yes.
So if you paid $100 in taxes, you get the same amount back as if you paid $1,000 in taxes?
Yeah, or $1 million or 500,000.
So what would be the average check that would go to a taxpayer?
That is a good question. I've been saying about $400, but we'd have to really look at that math. And of course, I mean, I'm open to this is just like a starting point to give you guys the option of what to do and put it in kind of the hopper as something you could do. If in the infinite wisdom of this committee, you decided to implement it in any number of other ways that may be better, I'd be happy to be part of that conversation or help out.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there proponents?
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Joey Adler-Ruane, Joey-Adler, space R-U-A-N-E, with Open Sky Policy Institute. We're in support of LB 185 because it would provide for an immediate return to Nebraska's current Nebraska's current general fund surplus to residents without altering the state's income tax structure, which we believe is a more prudent use of the funds the state has at its disposal, particularly given current economic uncertainty and high inflation. Other states have also taken this idea up and would provide a more substantial benefit to the state's hardworking families than they'd get under other income tax cuts proposed this session. LB 185 would be the simplest and quickest way to return the state's current surplus to its residents. The bill would send around $250 to each resident, including children, and get the money into people's pockets fast. This has been a stated goal of several senators in response to the state's current finances. We believe this bill provides the best mechanism to return these funds to Nebraskans. We also support 185 because it wouldn't leverage our temporary fiscal situation to make permanent changes to the state's tax code. We just began ratcheting down the state's top individual and corporate income tax rates, and the bill would immediately return excess funds to residents without jeopardizing future services. Other states, including at least 8 this year, have debated sending their surpluses back to residents via refunds. The trend started during the pandemic as states were awash with unexpected budget windfalls. Nebraska would certainly not be alone in issuing refunds with these extraordinary funds. Finally, people in the state, particularly low and middle income Nebraskans, have been hit hard by inflation and general economic uncertainty. LB 185 would provide hardworking Nebraska families with an immediate and meaningful reprieve. For example, a family of 4 in Nebraska earning the median wage would receive about $1,000 under LB 185, but that same family would only see about $50 under a 3.99% top rate. We believe LB 185 is the simple and fairest way to return the surplus to Nebraska families, and we'll do so in a way that won't jeopardize state services in the future. It's for these reasons we support 185. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Cal.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. So why would you give money back to children who may or may not be earning an income?
Sure.
Especially since they're already claimed on their parents' taxes.
Right. I think the thought process behind that was that since they also have expenses that come with having a child, it might be a good idea to give some money back to the family for that child.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cal. Are there other questions from the committee? Senator Von Gillen.
Thank you for your testimony. The other states that have done this, did they include children? And
I do not know off the top of my head, but I can figure that out for you and let you know.
okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van Gillen. You said that 8 states are discussing, or did you say 8 states have done it?
They're debating sending it back.
So nobody's passed the bill that does it.
Let me make sure that I don't have that for sure, but I will let you know where the other states have gone. I think when we started writing this testimony, they hadn't yet, but that doesn't mean that they haven't acted so far. So I will double check.
But right now, you don't know of any state who's actually passed this. Okay. And you said, how much is it per person?
Our general idea was that it'd be about $250 to each resident, including children. So a family of 4 would get $1,000.
Including people that don't pay income taxes?
No. It would just be people that pay taxes.
But it's not because children don't pay taxes.
Yeah, I think the belief was that if their parents paid for it and were claimed, if that makes sense. I think it was we could definitely revisit that and come back with something else if it was too complicated to do it like that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there other proponents? Are there any opponents? Anyone wanting to testify in neutral position?
I beat Senator Wayne's record, I think. Thank you, Chair Linehan, and thank you for the questions. And yeah, I should clarify, I apologize. So it goes to tax filers, but including for dependents. And so as testifier said, was it would include children, and it would go, it'd be, the way it's written currently would be a check would go to whoever filed the taxes. So me being somebody who files taxes with 4 dependents under this, under that math, would get a check for $1,250 or no, $1,500. And part of that is, and it would be for filers. So you are correct when you say that I think if you, a lot of people who file taxes that don't actually pay and they just get back the rebate, this would be in that same category. And one of the motivations for that is, of course, economic stimulus. Putting money in people's hands puts that back into the economy and creates further economic stimulus, which we did see as a result of the federal investment in the last couple of years. I would point out, just in my research, I saw 17 states did this last year, and they had, to Senator Von Gillern's question, lots of different variations, different amounts for children, different amounts for parents, some of them just for the filer, and some of them, I think, did it as we're suggesting here, which is just a straight check. Some of them did do it, as that kind of deduction.
You know of 17 states that have actually done it.
Did it last year, which, of course, we're not talking about the same climate that we were talking about a year ago, of course, with COVID and things like that. And this was started out as a suggestion. I know Senator Linehan recalls my suggestion as part of kind of a COVID stimulus on the national level, trickling down to the states and states doing it as a stimulus project. But I'm proposing it in the same vein, that it serves both the stimulus possibility, but also to return the excess tax dollars that we collected to the citizens of Nebraska in a different approach than a specific tax cut on the tax rate.
Thank you. Senator Von Gillern.
I can phrase this in the form of the question. How does this not simply fall into the category of wealth redistribution?
How does it not fall into the category as well?
When-
Yeah. So you mean, is it giving money?
It's a disproportionate refund of taxes that were not paid in by an individual, that were paid in by other individuals that are being distributed on a broad basis.
First, we do this already with a number of other mechanisms where people are actually getting more money back than they're putting in. And we do that for that exact purpose. It is an economic stimulus, but it's those, when you give money to people who are on the lower end, they're going to spend that money and put it back into the economy, and that's going to stimulate the economy overall. So, I mean, in the most, I guess, pure sense, it would probably qualify as that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van Gillern. Senator Dungan.
Thank you, Chair Minahan. I might be getting too in the weeds here, and I apologize. So if these checks go out and then just sit in a mailbox and aren't claimed, would that money just then stay in the general fund until it is utilized elsewhere? Because I imagine a lot of people who don't check their mail, don't have mailboxes that are the same as when they file their things. So if this goes out in checks, what happens to that unclaimed money?
Oh, that is a really good question. I don't have the answer to that. I would say that there is a mechanism by which people can file a form if they don't receive the check. So I think that may be a consideration. I suppose there's the hope that if people know that there's a check for $1,000 coming to their house, they're going to be on the lookout for it. But yeah, that may be a consideration. That might be a question that if we did go this method, they would have to speak with the department about how they address similar issues. I mean, I know you have the lost and unclaimed property program through the department, the treasurer's office, and I think money like this sometimes ends up there if people don't claim it after a certain amount of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Rena.
Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. So we get letters for the record.
Yes, I'd love maybe. You have it there,
Oh, it's not on page 8. Okay, 36. $350. So on 350, that was the one we just did, right?
That was
Oh. Okay, well, we had an opponent, so we'll have to put that in there. Okay, I'm sorry, we didn't have any on. What's one with 350, right? No, 350. Okay, so, no. Hi.
Good afternoon,
So now
Shirley.
we'll open the hearing on LB 36. Welcome, Senator DeBoer.
Thank you. This is my first time this year here. So good afternoon, Chair Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee. I think it's my first time this year. My name is Wendy DeBoer, WENDYDEBOER, and I represent District 10 in Northwest Omaha. I appear to you before you today to introduce LB 36, which would reduce the third income tax bracket from its current rate of 5.1% to 4.1% over a course of time between now and 2027. I have a very excellent introduction that was written for me to read to you by my assistant, and he did a great job, Brian did, but I'm going to go off the cuff now. So sorry about that, Brian.
It's really not a waste of time.
So last year, as you'll recall, when we had our income tax package, we but the top between the top rate and the second top rate. And that is why I've introduced this bill. But I understand that we may have capacity to raise the entire income tax system down more. So then a specific number wouldn't make sense. I'm not suggesting that I am married to 4.1% as some sort of absolute percentage that I'm interested in here. The reason I brought this bill is because I believe in keeping a progressive tax structure and not building too much regressivity into our tax structure. So my interest is keeping the top bracket and the second bracket at a distance, because we recognize that folks who are in that top bracket have a different income situation than those who are in the middle bracket. Obviously, the person who goes $1 into the next bracket is very similar to the one who's one short of it. And that's why we have these marginal tax rates. So to tell you what I'm talking about here, this would be the tax bracket that would affect those who, if married and filing jointly, would be between about $50,000 and $74,000. So it's that income group of married filing jointly. And if you're single, this would be between those who have $25,000 and those who have $36,000. So that's the income structure we're talking about. And that will include a lot of folks that have a lot of decent jobs in Nebraska. If you're making $20 an hour, then on the work that we did last year, the reduction in your income taxes was $11. So it seems to me that we would like to help out those folks who have some pretty good jobs in Nebraska to give them a tax deduction or a tax cut in the same way that we do others. And again, to make sure that we're keeping that progressivity in our tax code, because for me, that's really important. If you ask children, if you had 10 kids and all of them but one had 2 marshmallows and one of them had 100 marshmallows, and somehow you needed to extract 20 marshmallows, you wouldn't take the same percentage from each kid. You take more from the 100. The kids would figure that out. And so I think that the idea of a progressive tax code is something that we all can understand and understand the value of that, because if you have less money, you have less to spend on sort of the group effort that taxes are supposed to go for. And so I think it's really important that we help out the middle class people, especially in a time of inflation. And, our median income in Nebraska is not far off from this particular break in the tax bracket between the second one down and the top one. And so, so I would ask this committee to, when they are considering their income tax package, to consider progressivity of taxes, to consider keeping those two sort of separations in place. The fiscal note on this one, we were talking about this earlier this morning. Once this would be fully in place, if you look at the fiscal note, in year 27-28 is about when this would be fully in effect. And for that biennium, or fiscal year, sorry, that fiscal year, it would be $132 million. And some might say, well, how is that possible? Because that gets so many more people. That would take in a lot of Nebraskans. You know, the vast majority of Nebraskans would get a tax cut through this. If we bring down that second rate, that gives the vast majority of Nebraskans a tax cut, because that means that all the people in the higher tax bracket as well would get that when for their income that is within that tax bracket. And the question is, why would that be less than giving the top rate, who does not reach nearly as many people, a cut? And it's because you only have this little window in a marginal tax rate that you would be getting a reduced amount on. You only have that amount between, if you are married filing jointly, between 50,700 and 73,700, according to my calculations. So that's only the small window. Whereas on the top rate, everything above 73,700 would be reduced when we mess with that tax bracket or that tax rate. So that's why lowering that one is so much more expensive than lowering the one that's in the middle, because it's just less geography that we're handling there. So I would ask you to, if we don't do any other taxes cuts, to put forward this bill to lower the second rate down to 4.1%. But assuming that there will be other tax breaks that happen, that we will consider the way in which we structure these relative. And I trust this committee to be able to structure a tax package that way. Thank you. So that was not nearly as nice and riveting as Brian's would have been. But.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Van Gillen.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I heard, and thanks for, this is actually a question that I was working on earlier today, and I think you filled in the gap. That window is the 50,000 to the 73.7, is that what you said?
If you're filing jointly.
Jointly.
So once you
Okay.
get your standard deduction and all of that, so if you're, we figured it out based on a standard deduction rather than an itemization.
Okay.
So it would be between 50,000 and 73,000 approximately.
And in that bracket, some folks jointly or individually, they do qualify for some earned income tax credits and some other things that would.
I'll trust your word on that. Yeah,
I-
I'm sure that if they're
I'm
jointly.
not stating that as a fact because I believe that's the case, but.
Yeah, I
Jointly
also
we'll figure
believe
that
that, but I'm not 100%
Okay.
sure.
All right, thank you. And then my last question, there are some other tax reduction bills that have been proposed. Has this been coordinated with any of those? Are you aware of those others?
I am aware of those other bills, which is why I've said, if for some reason
Okay.
this committee elects not to do any of those,
Okay,
please consider this one.
thank you.
If it does elect to do some others, please consider the spirit of this one, which is to separate the top and the second one down.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Van Gillen. Are there other questions from the committee? So you're talking about the 5.01%?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did somebody raise their hand?
Yeah, they did. Oh, sorry.
So if that one went away, if that dropped, you're saying you could support dropping that rate? The 5.01, that's the second one down.
I'm saying this bill is to lower that one.
Okay,
I would like to lower that rate.
all right. Okay. Do you have proponents here?
I don't know.
Let me ask, just say, are there proponents? Are there opponents? Anyone wanting to testify in the neutral position? Letters. We had one proponent, two opponents, one neutral. Nobody representing the group. So. Okay, would you like to tell us?
If there are any questions that have been generated in the last 10 seconds, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions from the committee? Thank you, Senator DeBoer, for being here. Appreciate it. Okay, then we'll go to LB 211. Adopt the Property Tax Circuit Breaker Act. There she is. Senator Blood, welcome.
Go ahead.
So good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan and the entire Revenue Committee. My name is Carol Blood. That is spelled C-A-R-O-L. B as in boy, L-O-O-D as in dog. And I represent Legislative District 3, which comprises Western Bellevue and Eastern Papillion, Nebraska. So today I am bringing forward LB 211 because I believe it's time to bring the concept of circuit breakers bill into our tool belt to combat the effect of high property taxes as a smart way to move forward with relief for many Nebraska citizens. So it's time for the state of Nebraska to join the 18 other states and Washington, D.C., and move the needle forward to deliver Nebraskans the help they need. So in Nebraska, low-income taxpayers often pay a larger percentage of their income in taxes than high-income taxpayers do. As you all know, when it comes to property taxes, what you pay isn't based on your ability to pay, but on the value of your property. These types of taxes are disconnected from an owner's ability to pay. One type of targeted tax break for this problem is referred to as a circuit breaker program. This is what we hope to accomplish with LB 211. LB 211 creates a new mechanism for delivering tax credits to individuals whose property taxes are too high in relation to their annual income. This concept is called a circuit breaker because the income tax credits are triggered once property taxes reach a certain percentage of a person's income. Similar to how electrical circuit breakers are triggered when electricity surges. If it properly addresses the tension between rising property taxes and stagnating incomes, for instance, our senior citizens. Most of you remember last fall when Governor Ricketts held a press conference to encourage people to claim their property tax credits. Shortly after that, the Platt Institute rightly called out the shortcomings of this effort. This effort is a taxpayer active rather than taxpayer passive program. In other words, Nebraska taxpayers have to put in work if they are to claim their tax relief that they have already paid on their property taxes. Taxpayer passive relief comes from simply lowering the tax burden on the front end. At the press conference, it was also revealed why the taxpayer active approach is a problem. Nebraska's property tax credit for the year 2021 for returns filed in 2022 was worth approximately $500,000, but $200 million worth of property tax credits at that time remained unclaimed. So if you do the math, only 60 cents per tax relief dollar actually got delivered to Nebraska taxpayers. Nebraskans claimed only 60 cents on the dollar in property tax credits for tax year 2020 as well, which left $50 million with the state out of $125 million appropriated for property tax credits. As was noted in the article from the Platt Institute, tax relief should deliver more than 60 cents per dollar appropriated. This bill creates a residential refundable income tax credit and a separate ag refundable income tax credit. The overall amount for the residential circuit breaker would be capped at $126 million, and the ag circuit breaker would be capped at $74 million. The bill's residential relief would go to taxpayers with adjusted gross incomes, AGIs, of less than $100,000 for married couples filing jointly, or $50,000 for any other taxpayers who rent or own their primary residence in Nebraska. For homeowners, the credit calculation is based on the property taxes paid on the value of their home. For renters, 20% of their rent paid for the taxable year would be eligible for a credit. As income increases, the circuit breaker credit calculation assumes that taxpayers can afford to spend more of their income on property taxes. Qualified taxpayers would receive refundable income tax credits equal to the amount of their property taxes that exceed the set percent of income, up to the maximum amount of the credit. The ag land circuit breaker in LB 211 would be available to individuals who own ag land or horticultural land that is part of a farming operation that has a federal AGI of less than $350,000, the most recent taxable year. AGI, or adjusted gross income, is defined as gross income minus adjustments to income. Gross income includes your wages, dividends, capital gains, business income, retirement distributions, as well as other income. The tax credit would be calculated based upon the amount by which the ag property taxes paid exceeds 7% of farm income. 18 U.S. states and territories are currently utilizing the system to address tax grievances. So I ask that we perhaps consider enacting this tool in Nebraska to help working class families and other workers across our state. With that, I hope you don't ask really detailed questions because I barely got my brain wrapped around this one.
Other questions from the committee? Senator Powell.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. I do have one, and it might be too technical. It's on section 4. It talks about a qualifying residential taxpayer who pays rent for the right to occupy. So are you subsidizing people's rent by doing that if they're getting a tax credit for their rent?
Yes.
Okay.
So renters are definitely, I don't need to look at the bill to tell you that, renters are definitely included, and we consider that they're probably spending at least 20% of their income on rent. But again, that would be, I did. That's not a technical question. That's, I better know my bill question. But it's when we get down to the graphs and we break it down that I do not have that memorized. I would be the first to tell you that. But, you know, the thing is that we give out a lot of property tax credits. And the senator, one of the things that I've always found really concerning is that, yes, the property owners pay property taxes, but they pass that on to the people who rent from them. And it feels like if we want to really give tax relief to Nebraskans, we have to really look at the big picture. And would I be open to changing this around and taking out categories, adding categories? Yeah, absolutely. I just want to get this conversation started. Last year, we did bring this bill a little bit differently written to this committee, and unfortunately, I had a hearing at the exact same time, so it was my staff that had to present it. So we thought we'd take another run. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Senator Powell. Are there other questions from the committee? You said residential and ag, but you didn't say anything about commercial. Or is that, you mean commercial too in residential?
Ag and
Commercial,
horticulture.
like-
I said ag, horticultural, residential, and renters.
Right, so there's residential and commercial, because in the Constitution, we can treat ag different, but not residential and commercial.
Oh, I was not aware of that. And that was not brought up when we drafted the bill.
Well, I didn't-
That's a conversation we're going to have.
Because I don't think you can give residential something you don't give commercial.
Fair enough. Which is why you're chair of revenue.
We've had a lot of conversations. So are there any other questions on the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there proponents?
Good afternoon again, Chairperson Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Joey Adler-Ruane, Joey-ADLER space RUANE, and I'm the Policy Director at Open Sky Policy Institute. I'm here today to testify in support of LB 211 because property tax circuit breakers are an effective way to provide targeted tax reduction to those whose property taxes are high in relation to their incomes. The residential circuit breaker is available to taxpayers who rent or own their primary residence in Nebraska and have adjusted gross incomes of less than $100,000 if they are married and filing jointly, or $50,000 for all other types of filers. For homeowners, the credit calculation is based on their property taxes paid on their home value up to 200% of the county average assessed value for a single family home. For renters, the credit calculation assumes that a portion of their rent, 20% in this case, pays property taxes based on the passed on by the property owner. Just as with our current homestead exemption, a type of circuit breaker, as income increases, LB 211's credit calculation assumes taxpayers can afford to put a greater percentage of their income towards property taxes. For a taxpayer who meets the income criteria, the amount of refundable income tax credit in LB 211 is equal to their property taxes paid minus a set percentage of their income, as determined by the bill's marginal rates up to a maximum credit amount. The ag circuit breaker in LB 211 is available to individuals who own agricultural or horticultural land that has been used as part of a farming operation that has less than $350,000 in federal adjusted gross income. The income tax credit would be calculated based on the amount by which the ag property taxes paid exceeds 7% of the farm income, and there would be one credit per farming operation. The use of circuit breakers as a means to offset property taxes has garnered support across the country, where 18 states had similar programs as of 2019, and in Nebraska, where they have been mentioned as a possible solution to Nebraska's property tax challenges in both the Tax Modernization Committee final recommendations in 2013 and a December 2014 Revenue Committee report on property taxes. As the state looks at ways to address the financial burden of property taxes, especially on those who are least able to afford them, LB 211 provides targeted property tax reduction to those who need it most. Thank you for your time. Happy to try and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Do you have any breakdown, Senator Blood's going to hear this question too. Do you have any breakdown of how much of the fiscal note would go to renters versus owners?
No, but I don't know that that would be easily to find out, but I will try and work with Connie to get that for you.
Okay. Do you understand if commercial was left out or?
I heard your question and I tried to get an answer before I got up here, but I haven't yet, but I will definitely have somebody look into it for you as well.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there other proponents? Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Any opponents? Are there anyone wanting to testify in the neutral position? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan, distinguished members of the Revenue Committee. My name is John Cannon, Joncannon. I'm the Executive Director of NACO, here to testify today in a neutral capacity on LB 211. Last year, for a substantially similar bill that brought by Senator Blood, we were opposed. And I want to clarify why we've changed to a position of neutrality. And last year, our opposition was primarily for the complexity of the mechanism. I'll go into the ifs and ands and buts about that here in just a second. But generally, we favor targeted property tax relief. We think that's an effective mechanism for delivering relief to the citizens of our state. And when it comes right down to it, a mechanism for delivering that sort of relief is just that. It's just a vessel to get us to where we want to go. This shares many similar features to the homestead, as has been described. Specifically in our Constitution, we have, it's Article 8, Section 2, subsection 11. We provide for explicitly the exemption of homestead, and that's provided in our Constitution. And it doesn't apply to agricultural land. It does not apply to commercial. It's just for the homesteads that are actually owned and occupied by a person that's paying taxes. So the mechanism that we have here, I want to go through it just a little bit because I think it's kind of important to understand. There's a series of applications that take place over 3 different tax periods. First, what you do is you've got the qualifying year where you're paying your property taxes. In the next year, so the year after you've paid your property taxes, what you have to do is you have to make an application to the Department of Revenue. And that application is, and you have to, there's certain things you put on the form. You have to put your, name, address, all that good stuff. You have to put the property taxes that you paid on your parcel, whether you're agricultural or residential. And then you have to do that between January 1st and April 15th of that tax year following the year in which you paid your property taxes. In 2023, presumably I pay my property taxes. In 2024, I'm going to make this application for a certification. The Department of Revenue gives me a certification by December 31st of that year, so 12/31 of 2024. And then in the next succeeding tax year, I get to file my refundable income tax credit using that certification from the Department of Revenue. So like I said, that mechanism takes place over 3 different tax periods. The homestead has the advantage of being something that is pretty automatic. I make my application in 2023. I'm going to receive my homestead exemption, at whatever percentage is determined by the Department of Revenue that same tax year, and then the tax loss is reimbursed in the following tax year. So that everything else that occurs in a different tax year is kind of on the back end of things. And again, I'm just going to say there could be some very valid reasons why we might want to defer having that property tax relief go out. That is a policy consideration solely for the legislature. I'm just kind of pointing out the differences between what we have and what's being proposed here. But it is still an application process. There are 2 points of contact. You have to apply for your certification, and then you have to file your income tax return the following year. So there is an added level of complexity that there may be perfectly valid reasons for adding that layer in there, depending on how late you're trying to get this out. And when you're talking about state funds, we want to draw interest on those. I get that. So anyway, that's really all I had to say. I just wanted to walk through the mechanism of it and say, here are the differences between what we've got currently. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Other questions from the committee? So you're saying this is an extension of Homestead Act?
It looks very similar to Homestead. However, if we do make it if we want to graft it onto Homestead, and you could come up with a different category. For instance, right now we've got over age 65, we've got totally disabled individuals, and then we've got disabled veterans. You could add a different category that says, for persons that have a low income. You could do that.
So there's a constitutional amendment passed so we can do the homestead, so they could treat it different than commercial?
Yes, ma'am. That's again, Article 8, Section 2 is that goes through all the things that are allowed to be exempted. And so, and I think the distinguishing feature of the homestead exemption is that we're not doing anything with value. We're not valuing residential property any differently than we're valuing commercial. Obviously, we value ag differently, however, it's 75%. But what that does is it has that mechanism where we value them the same, we levy against the whole amount for homestead exemption purposes, and then there's a reimbursement based on whatever percentage of exemption that qualifying taxpayer gets.
So the fiscal note is $190 million.
Yes, ma'am.
So we're already on the homestead, it's what, 120 million will be next year?
Yeah, if it hasn't blown past that already.
So don't you think if the legislature was spending 310 million on property tax relief, it would be some pushback on property tax, people who collect property tax? Because that's what this does, right? It just, counties don't lose any money, cities don't lose any money, schools don't lose any money. It just, the state starts paying their bills.
Right. So with this bill, I'm a property tax, the property tax process proceeds the way it always has.
Right.
And then what someone is doing is they're essentially claiming a refundable income tax credit like we did with 1107. And that is handled solely at the state. And so, I mean, from the perspective of the counties, and I don't want to speak for the cities, I don't want to summon Lynn Rex here again, but from the perspective of counties, and I assume all the other political subdivisions, we're made whole. The process continues as it always has. The price tag is something that, I mean, again, that's a policy decision for the legislature.
All right, any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Are there any other positions in neutral? We're not done. I wish it was. Oh, I'll be here tomorrow.
John's out.
Maybe you're done. Does anyone else want to testify in a neutral position? Okay, would you like to close?
I should have had him present my bill. I appreciate the input, and we maybe should have said this in our introduction, but the homestead policy that we have is a circuit breaker bill.
See, I learned something today.
Oh, all right, yeah, and last year I said that in
I should have
intro.
figured that out.
And I didn't want to insult your intelligence, so I didn't say it this year, so I try not to be redundant. So last year, Senator Linehan and Senator Breezy, I always brag about my long memory when it comes to debate. We had a conversation last session on the floor where we discussed the ability for Nebraskans to automatically receive their tax breaks, and the statement was made that Nebraskans are smart enough to fill out their paperwork and ask for their money. And I've really never thought that Nebraskans weren't smart enough to do this. I just have always felt that Nebraskans shouldn't have to come to us with their hands out asking for money that's clearly due to them when we provide tax relief. You know, I always think of that movie Oliver, like, please, sir, more, sir. And I know that that's not our intent. I get that. We've done a lot with property tax relief. When you think about how we started and there was no money and where we're at now, it's crazy. But Nebraskans work really hard. And I don't feel we should make them jump through additional hoops when they try to claim these funds. And granted, there's paperwork in the process. But, you know, I'm not really criticizing what's been done in the past. I'm just saying that we never truly try anything new to make the system taxpayer passive. So we know that those who truly need the relief are really getting the relief. And what we have is a platform here that we can hold on to and work on over the summer. But we do have an ability to do something different that we've never done before. And we could really help the people that truly need it. And what does that equal? That equals disposable income that they then turn around and they pay their bills and they buy things in their communities, because we know that most tax relief is spent locally. So it's a win-win for all involved if we can figure it out. And the fiscal note is kind of crazy because in some ways it's going to alleviate them of some responsibilities. And I feel like sometimes when one of our organizations within the government doesn't want to do something, they make sure that it's a really nice fat fiscal note. And I'm a little concerned about the fiscal note, but at the same token, expected the fiscal note to be what it was.
Any questions from the committee? I think you would find the renters are a huge part of the fiscal note because it's 20% of people rent. So that would be, I'm guessing that, you should check with the fiscal office, but I'm guessing a lot of that's renters.
We can find out for you, and hopefully we'll have an answer. All right,
All right. Any other questions?
all right, thank y'all.
Well, wait, letters.
Yes.
Yep, somewhere. That's what happens when
I like the two opposition letters on the line. Did you see those? They both say, I oppose the bill. Nothing else.
yes, 211. So you have 4 proponents, 2 opponents, and 0 neutral. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, friends.
Uh-huh. And that's it, believe it or not.